Now that you have built an architecture roadmap with work packages and dependencies in phase E, you are ready to make it executable through migration planning. Phase F is where enterprise architecture stops being a compelling narrative and becomes a delivery plan that can survive budgets, operational constraints, and real world change fatigue. This phase is not about writing a detailed project schedule. It is about prioritization, sequencing, and governance ready planning so the enterprise can move from current state to target direction through controlled transitions without breaking the business. Building on the roadmap, you should treat phase F as the step where you translate intent into an execution ready migration plan. Leaders want to know what changes first, what value is delivered early, what risks must be controlled, and what operating impact will be experienced along the way. Delivery leaders want to know the sequence that reduces dependency conflicts and prevents late redesign. Operations teams want to know what will change in the live environment and how stability will be protected. Your phase F outcome is a plan that balances value, risk, capacity, and dependency constraints, so the enterprise can move confidently rather than hoping everything lines up. With the goal clear, you need to recognize why migration planning often fails in practice. Failure happens when sequencing is driven by enthusiasm rather than dependency logic, when leaders underestimate operational constraints, and when teams discover risk too late. Failure also happens when there is no clear prioritization model, so every stakeholder claims their initiative is most urgent. Another failure is ignoring organizational change capacity, which causes migration fatigue and resistance. TOGAF 10 encourages you to treat migration planning as a disciplined decision process, not as an optimistic timeline exercise. In phase F, you bring reality into the plan so success becomes likely rather than accidental. Now that you understand the failure modes, you need a guiding question that keeps phase F practical. You ask, what must move first to make everything else safer, faster, and cheaper? This usually points to foundations such as identity and access, network patterns, observability, data governance, and integration standards. When these foundations are weak, migrations become risky and expensive. When foundations are strong, migrations become repeatable and predictable. This question also prevents political prioritization because it anchors sequencing on enterprise enablement rather than on who shouts the loudest. With the guiding question in place, you now need prioritization because migration is always constrained by time, money, and people. Prioritization in phase F should be explicit and agreed, not informal and emotional. You prioritize based on business value, risk reduction, dependency readiness, and operational impact. You also consider urgency drivers such as regulatory deadlines, end-of-life technology, and major incident learnings. The outcome is a prioritization logic that leaders can defend and teams can trust. This is where you act as an enterprise architect and a strategic advisor, because you are shaping what the enterprise will do now, what it will do later, and what it will not do at all. Now that priorities are visible, sequencing becomes the discipline that makes the plan executable. Sequencing is not simply ordering work packages. It is arranging change so prerequisites are in place, risks are controlled, and value is delivered progressively. The right sequence reduces rework because teams are not forced to redesign due to missing foundations. The right sequence reduces operational disruption because changes are introduced in manageable increments. The right sequence also protects stakeholder confidence because progress becomes visible and credible. In phase F, sequencing is your strongest lever for success because the wrong order can cause failure even if the architecture direction is correct. With sequencing established, You must plan transition states because enterprises rarely move cleanly from current to target in one step. Transition states are periods where you operate hybrid environments, parallel systems, temporary integrations, and stage rollouts. If you do not plan these states, you create operational confusion and increase risk. In phase F, you define what each transition state looks like, what standards apply, what temporary controls are required, and what the exit criteria are to move to the next state. This makes the plan safer because operations teams can prepare and leaders can understand the operating implications of being in an intermediate state. Now that transition states are considered, you need strong dependency management because dependencies are the real constraints on sequencing. Dependencies include technical prerequisites, shared platform readiness, vendor timelines, data availability, and operating model readiness. They also include governance dependencies, such as needing risk acceptance or compliance approvals before certain migrations can proceed. In phase F, you make dependencies visible and you manage them deliberately, which prevents the common problem where programs stall mid-flight because something critical was assumed rather than planned. When dependencies are visible, leaders can allocate funding and capacity to unblock them, and delivery teams can plan realistically. With dependencies managed, you must plan for human capacity because transformation is limited by people, not just by technology. Teams have finite bandwidth, and the organization has limited appetite for constant disruption. If you overload the organization, you create burnout and resistance, and migration quality drops. Phase F helps you create an executable plan by respecting capacity limits and by sequencing change in a way that allows stabilization between major shifts. You also consider organizational readiness, such as training needs, new operational processes, and support model changes. This is critical leadership work because a technically correct plan can still fail if it ignores the human system that must execute it. Now that capacity is included, you can design migration waves based on risk and value. Early waves often focus on building foundations and migrating lower risk workloads to build confidence and refine patterns. Middle waves scale migration and target high value capabilities once foundations are proven. Later waves handle the most complex and highest risk components, such as core systems or deeply integrated legacy platforms, once the enterprise has maturity and operational stability. This wave approach makes migration safer because it creates learning cycles and reduces the chance of a single massive failure. It also makes it easier to communicate progress because each wave has clear outcomes and success measures. With waves defined, you now translate architecture into portfolio commitments. This means your migration plan must connect work packages to funding, ownership, and governance checkpoints. Leaders must know who is accountable for each work package, what success looks like, and what risks are being accepted. Delivery leaders must know dependencies, integration requirements, and operational readiness expectations. Operations leaders must know what will change and how stability will be protected. This is where you move from architecture roadmap to enterprise delivery plan. You are not managing every project, but you are defining the enterprise sequence and the guardrails that keep delivery aligned to target direction. Now that the delivery plan is formed, you need progress measures because migration without measurement becomes drip. You measure progress not only by volume, such as number of systems migrated, but by outcomes such as reduced incident rates, reduced duplication, improved value stream performance, and improved compliance posture. You also measure leading indicators such as adoption of standard patterns, reduction in exceptions, and improved time to decision. These measures give leaders confidence and help you adjust sequencing when reality changes. In phase F, measurement is part of governance because it tells you whether the plan is working and whether the enterprise is moving toward the target direction. With metrics in mind, imagine you are sequencing a cloud migration across multiple business units. Your plan begins with foundations such as identity and access direction, network segmentation patterns, observability baselines, and secure configuration standards. You then run early migration waves on lower risk services to validate patterns and operational readiness. As confidence grows, you scale to higher value services and integrate consistent data and application patterns from phase C. You schedule the most complex migrations later, after dependencies are resolved and operations maturity is proven. Throughout, you measure outcomes such as incident reduction, improved deployment stability, and reduced time to onboard new workloads. This is phase F in action. A controlled, repeatable migration plan rather than a rushed move that creates cloud chaos. Building on cloud migration, consider a plan to consolidate applications and establish authoritative data sources. You prioritize by focusing on the value streams with the highest friction and the capabilities with the greatest weakness. You sequence by first clarifying data ownership and authoritative sources, then introducing integration patterns that allow systems to coexist during transition. You plan migration waves that gradually shift workloads and retire duplicates only when dependencies and reporting needs are satisfied. You include operational readiness and communication checkpoints so the business is not surprised by changes in processes and data visibility. This plan works because it respects transition states and avoids the mistake of retiring systems before the enterprise is ready. Now that examples are clear, you need governance checkpoints because migration planning must be governable. You define where major decisions must be confirmed, such as approving wave scope, approving readiness to migrate high-risk systems, approving risk acceptance for temporary controls, and approving retirement of legacy platforms. These checkpoints are not bureaucracy, they are safety controls that prevent irreversible mistakes. They also create trust because leaders see that the plan includes controls and decision points rather than blind execution. When governance checkpoints are clear, teams can plan proactively and avoid late-stage approval delays. With governance in place, you need adaptability because reality will change. New risks emerge, budgets change, vendor roadmaps shift, and business priorities move. An executable migration plan is not fixed, but it is controlled. You keep direction stable by holding on to principles, target outcomes, and non-negotiable guardrails. You adjust sequencing and wave scope through governance based on evidence and constraints. This keeps the enterprise moving while avoiding chaos. In phase F, you are designing a plan that can bend without breaking, which is a leadership hallmark of mature enterprise architecture. Let's now discuss the key takeaways from what you learned so far so you can apply it immediately. You learned that phase F migration planning turns the phase E roadmap into an executable enterprise delivery plan by applying disciplined prioritization, sequencing, and dependency management. You learned that migration planning fails when it relies on optimism and ignores hidden constraints, and that your leadership role is to bring reality into the plan. You learn to prioritize based on value, risk reduction, dependency readiness, and operational impact supported by clear decision logic leaders can defend. You learn that sequencing is the difference between a plan and a fantasy, and that foundations often must come first to make everything else safer and faster. You learn to plan transition states because the enterprise will operate in hybrid conditions, and you learn to manage dependencies explicitly to prevent mid-flight stalls. You learn to account for human capacity and change fatigue because transformation is limited by people as much as by technology. You learned how risk-based migration waves deliver value progressively while controlling risk, and how measurement and governance checkpoints prevent drift and maintain trust. Now that you know how to run phase up migration planning as a practical prioritization and sequencing discipline, you are ready to create enterprise delivery plans that leaders can fund and teams can execute without breaking the business. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, share it with your architecture and delivery peers, and comment with the hardest migration planning challenge you face in your organization today, such as dependency complexity, change fatigue, or unclear prioritization, and why it keeps getting in the way.